Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe. I'm very excited to welcome Aaron Neuwirth to the podcast today to talk about Superfly, released 50 years ago in August of 1972. How are we doing, Aaron?
Doing very well. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for being here to talk about Superfly, a movie I had never seen before until last night. Really interesting experience. Before we get into the movie today, I'd love for you to talk about kind of your history with film. What do movies mean to you? I'll give you the floor to start off with.
Sure. Yeah, glad to be a Superfly. We'll talk about it, but I enjoy my share of blaxploitation films for sure. Mm-hmm. But films in general, yeah, it's always been a passion of mine. I've been watching films since I was a very young child. My mom introduced me to not just the standard kid stuff, but I was watching Hitchcock films when I was young.
Oh, cool, me too.
And she was she loved horror films as well, so I've always been a big horror fan.
Oh, awesome.
And I grew up with things like Predator and Terminator 2. So as far as things go, and yeah, getting more into film over time. Early 2000s, started kind of blogging on my own with the early blog movie sites. Like before Letterboxd, there was Flickster. That was
right. Yeah.
And eventually I started going to Comic-Con, things like that, and I met a person named Brian White who runs a site called Why So Blue, which reviews Blu-rays largely, does film reviews or what have you as well. Connected with him, started writing for that site, and I still do to this day. As far as
cool.
I handle some Criterion reviews and some occasional Blu-ray reviews over on that site, but work my way up from there. It's kind of continuing to just move through that site to get more access to press screenings or what have you. I now write for I'm the managing editor for We Live Entertainment now at this point. That site that was created by Scott Menzel.
Okay.
So I write and edit for that site, and I've since I do some freelance work for Variety as well. I'm a part of a couple of movie groups at this point, the Hollywood Critics Association, as well as the Online Film Critics Associate. There's these names, these abbreviations or whatnot, but yeah, a lot in some of these groups, what have you, writing about movies as much as I can, because I just really love experiencing film. I also co-host a podcast with my friend Abe. It's called Out Now with Aaron and Abe. We've been doing this since 2011, which is insane to think about.
Wow.
We cover weekly movie releases. We also do a commentary track every month, which is always a lot of fun. Between the variety of guests that we get onto every show and being able to just talk about movies on a weekly basis like this, it's super enjoyable.
That's awesome.
As far as the kinds of movies that asking anybody their favorite movie, it's a fool's errand when it comes to critics, right?
I know.
It's like, yeah, we like movies, but I tend to go by what's on my Letterboxd top 4 these days. And honestly, when people ask me for my default right now, Jaws. I tend to just say Jaws.
Yep.
My favorite movie. Jaws. I'm Jackie Brown. Tarantino's film, so good. Absolutely one of my favorites.
Jackie Brown is one of those rare movies for me. Every time I watch it, it gets better. I find it gets better the more I watch it. Like when I saw it when I was young, opening weekend, I was like, I don't know what to make of this. And then as I get older and I watch it more, like the ultimate hangout movie, amazing ensemble cast, and I love it.
It has so many qualities. And honestly, we're talking about Superfly today. It's very much fits into its own kind of blaxploitation film, despite being made by a white man. But big Tarantino guy in general. But I'm also like I think Empire Strikes Back is currently in my top 4, and City of God is on my top 4 right now, which is a film I absolutely adore. So yeah, but wide variety. I don't really have many genres I avoid. If the movie's good, I'm enjoying.
Yeah, that's what I say too. There's no genre. I mean, there are certain genres I like more than others. I'll never avoid a genre.
For sure.
Like historical costume dramas, those typically are not my thing. But then you get a movie like The Favorite in 2018 was on my top 5 of the year. I loved that movie. So you never know what's going to come.
Yeah, it's like I know the term superhero fatigue goes around. I get biopic fatigue. I get biopic fatigue, and from September to December, biopic fatigue gets in. But every now and then you get one that's trying to do something different, or attacks just a specific point in time as opposed to telling me the life story. And it's like, here we go. Here's a good performance matched with a screenplay that seems to want to go after something in particular. That's that works for me. But yeah, in general, like I mentioned, I've watched horror since I was young, and I really lean on horror. On the podcast, every October we like to do a special thing where every week we have a special horror bonus episode. That's really
cool.
some theme of like we covered. One year we just did the decade, so we did like an episode on the 20s and 30s, then 40s, 50s, 60s, then so when we did like just slashers, just horror comedies, just monster. So that's there's so much to explore within that genre alone. That's always been fascinating to me. But then like dark comedies or what have you, I'm lean on big Cohen guy. So a wide berth.
Yeah, the horror genre is my favorite. I grew up with it too. My mom didn't like them so much, but my dad did. So he showed me all the big ones when I was young. And what I love about horror films, kind of talking about this podcast going back 50 years and looking at films over a variety of decades, like that genre is so interesting. How every few years it has like a new stage. To it. Mm-hmm. There's never like one decade to the next where the genre looks the same. Like it's always changing.
Yeah, like we had a spat of like just recently it was like found footage for a bit, and we got to we got to like haunted houses for a little bit for a while, and and ghosts. Not sure where we're at right now though. I gotta look at the
I mean, I feel like right now, I mean, we still get the occasional remake here and there, but I feel like we're a little bit more in that hereditary zone of like cool, like indie art house films, like
trauma is the thing. Trauma horror
movies about grief and trauma. Exactly. So and so looking at our topic today with Superfly, this is a really interesting period of cinema history, this blaxploitation genre, which would we say started the year before with Shaft and
Sweetback.
Sweetback. Were those the two that kind of launched this subgenre?
Right? Melvin Van Peebles making being a black man making an independent movie that became a success. Like that's sorry, what is it? Sweetback's badass song. I get it confused because
with lots of A's.
because Mario Van Peebles made like his tribute, like his biopic of the making of that movie, which is called I think just Badass.
His son. What was that, like 0304?
Something like that. Yeah. So sometimes I get the titles confused in my mind because like Sweetback, that's the one. So that's generally considered like the founding blaxploitation. But there's a few others before it. It's more like proto blaxploitation. It's like Psycho's a proto slasher, right? So like this is like a proto blaxploitation movies, but like Sweetback, that's generally looked at as like the initial entry. Shaft is the other, those the two most iconic ones. Along with Superfly, honestly.
Sweetback, I believe, is April of 71, and then Shaft, which we talked about last summer, that was June of 71. Was a huge hit, made for very little money. I don't think anyone saw that film coming, and went on to win the Academy Award for Best Song.
It's funny. Your timing of asking me to record this could not have been any better, because I honestly, like, already I'm like, yes, Superfly, sure, I could pull that out of my shelf and watch it right away. But then in the mail, because I tied this in, I get Criterions to review for Light So Blue. I got the Shaft 4K Criterion that's coming out in a couple
of weeks. That's going to be on Criterion. I can't wait.
It's great. I watched it also. I had a good blaxploitation weekend. I watched Superfly, then I watched Shaft on its new 4K transfer, which looks wonderful. And it's packed with extras, and it has and it has Shaft's big score, the first sequel, which I also think is quite good. So I was like,
great.
The timing of this was wonderful as far as watching these movies.
Yeah, there's like two sequels right away to Shaft, right? Shaft's big score is 72, right?
Yep. And Shaft in Africa 73.
Shaft in Africa.
And then there's a TV series that's similar to like Columbo, where each episode's like an hour and 15 minutes. Like they're like chunky episodes. So it's basically like you have 7 additional movies. Like
I remember researching those. Like it didn't go on super long, right? Because was it Roundtree who wanted out of the show?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. But then after that, there's kind of a long, but then we get Shaft in 2000 with Sam Jackson, who's also in a Superfly movie, which I just found out about 30 minutes ago.
Yeah, he's in the Return of Superfly, I believe.
Yeah, his face is big on like the DVD cover, and I'm like, I'd be curious to know in 1990 how much of this movie Samuel L. Jackson's in, but we'll see. And then we get the Shaft, another Shaft film. Was that 2019?
Yeah, not to be confused with Shaft and Shaft. This one's called Shaft. So
it always makes me think about, remember when The Butler came out in 2013 and they couldn't use that title because there was a silent film that was also called The Butler, and then there's like all these other movies that just use the same title over and over. I'm like, well, what's going on here?
What I like about a friend of mine, David Bax from the Battleship Pretension podcast, he likes to refer to it as Lee Daniels The Butler.
like looking back almost 10 years later, was that done just to like create some talk about the movie? Like, was it really a lawsuit about some silent movie? It just seems so weird.
It's weird that he's run into that multiple times since he has Lee Daniels' Precious based on the novel Pushed by Sapphire.
Was that ever called Lee Daniels' Precious? I feel like,
I mean, I think I've auto-corrected now to be calling it Lee Daniels.
But they would say
Precious.
like at award shows, they'd say based on the novel Pushed by Sapphire. I'm like, it's a good thing that author of that novel wasn't like a 3-word name, because that'd be a really long title.
Yeah.
So Shaft gets a couple sequels right away. Our movie today, Superfly, also had a sequel right away, released in 1973. But then it takes another 17 years to get to
Superfly TNT, which is a great sequel name.
Is it good? So you've seen the second one?
I haven't seen the sequel. I have not seen the sequel, but the title alone is really good. Like if you called it, Avengers TNT, I'd be in that theater right away. Like that's just a great subtitle for a sequel.
Yeah, and it makes sense that these movies have sequels because they don't cost a lot of money to make, and they can do it really quickly. Superfly, which we're talking about today, was shot in early 72.
Yeah.
And then it came out in the summer. Like, you don't see that today very often, right? A movie's shooting in the spring and then it comes out in summer.
Because there's so much franchising and all the things that go into these things that are, planned universes and what have you. Where back in the day, it's like if the thing's popular, capitalize on it, get the script together in a couple days, start shooting in the summer, release it next fall. Like that's just the sequel pattern. And the sequel pattern is also that they're, they look chintzier and they're not as good. Right. So at least today, as cynical as it can be about the franchising nature, at least there's effort put into these things to somewhat deliver. I mean, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. I think of a giant blockbuster movie that costs hundreds of millions was shooting like just a few months before it came out, there'd be some worry, right? I think it happens occasionally, like reshoots and stuff, but like I remember, I think Lethal Weapon 4 shot in the spring of 98, and then the movie came out in July.
That was famously like a really rushed production. Like they Donner and them just was like, okay, we got it, let's do this, and they shot the thing really quickly and knocked it. Like, and that, with that said, it's not bad. Like,
and it was pretty good.
It's got some great set pieces in it for sure. It's got some fun stuff with Mel Gibson in the before times when he was still acceptable. And
exactly.
But another one, X-Men First Class. That was one that was like done
really? That one was shot shooting
with like under a year. Like it started. It's like it was a June release date. It started like in July or August. Like as far as like made, shot, effects, post production. Right. Released. Like it was a crazy rush schedule for that one.
Yeah, the game I like to play now is like, was this shot pre or post pandemic? Like,
there you go.
Didn't Top Gun start shooting in 2018?
Yeah, it's a Miles Teller is 40 years older now than when they shot the movie.
It's like the big budget version of Margaret with Anna Paquin. Like we're just like
that exact example. Margaret.
But as it turned out, people don't care if it was shot 4 years ago. If people like it, people love it, it'll be a big success. So that was
good. Yeah, it helps.
Nobody was like, oh, this was shot in 2018, because it's been a weird few years. It's not about the quality so much. It's about when's the best time to release some of these movies. So it made sense.
I'll be curious if Minions, one of the very last delayed films, has like very specific 2017 references. It's like, this joke isn't funny anymore.
Yeah, they released a comic.
The movie. The movie's been locked for years. So.
Yeah, that's where it gets tricky when it's like, Accidental Love, right? That movie that I think was shot in 2007, 2008, and it came out in 2015. That was a comedy. I never saw it, but I'm assuming some of the jokes didn't land in 2015.
This is such interesting trivia that we're pulling out. Yeah, movies that were famously shot and released later.
Yeah, so I have a YouTube channel, Brian Rowe Video, and I do a lot of Oscar pieces. My new video that I'm making right now is on Jake Gyllenhaal. So I do have a little segment on what has been an incredible decade for him, right? The last 10 years has been just extraordinary work, especially Nightcrawler, which I adore. And then right in the middle there's Accidental Love, which I felt like I had to talk about and say, well, technically he shot it the previous decade, so we'll give him a break. But Superfly. So this came out in the summer of 1972. As I said, had a sequel right away. People, I feel like, often talk about the franchise as being like post Jaws, post Star Wars, but even some of these lower budget movies, that, as we talked about, they would get sequels. Boom, boom, boom. Planet of the Apes was another one for about 5 years. Would just have another one.
I mean, that was the Planet of the Apes was the biggest franchise in the world before before Star Wars, or I don't know, Godfather, before like these other Jaws, before these other ones, like really, like that was one that was like, it had sequels, TV show, cartoon, lunchboxes, like it had everything.
You had the Universal monster movies of the 30s and 40s. I mean,
I guess Bond is the other thing.
Bond would, I would say Bond would be like, because that started in 62 and is still going strong today. That's one of our most important franchises for sure, especially to see how that changes over the decades too. You watch, like, you put one on, like, it's like right after I saw No Time to Die last year, we recorded the episode about the 1971 about the last big one, the last big one that Sean Connery made, Diamonds Are Forever, which came out in 1971. That was a strange experience to watch No Time to Die, and then I think it was a day later I watched Diamonds Are Forever, and I was like, man, this franchise has come a long way.
Yeah. Well, that's not a good entry. It
was not great. It's one I always want to like because it's Connery. He came back for one more official movie, so I'm like, and it's like, man, it's like they have On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is just wonderful movie, just great, and then but with someone else and then they bring Connery back, and it's like, you couldn't have a better script. I don't know, too bad.
Thinking of franchise in relation to Superfly, you have and this just came out on a 4K on Kino a few weeks ago, In the Heat of the Night. Heat of the Night with Sidney Poitier, which has 2 sequels as well. It has They Call Me Mr. Tibbs and The Organization, which has Ron O'Neal in it.
Ron O'Neal, yep.
But that's another one where, and I didn't realize that till way later that there were sequels to In the Heat of the Night. Because for one thing, I'm a huge fan of that movie, but it's like, oh, they made like more. And Poitier had an action franchise, which is kind of like crazy to think about. That there was, this, a black man, an Oscar winner, prestigious actor, who also just had like a cop series of his own that was making money.
And in the early 70s, they weren't so concerned with pre-awareness of like calling the movie the same thing as the last one. Whereas today, most sequels, you can tell like what it is. It'd be like, if Top Gun Maverick was called something else, not Top Gun, I don't think it'd be as successful. I think it has to have that in the title. But back then, like the Planet of the Apes sequels are all called something different. And then, Shaft and Superfly have the name and the title, so that's a little different. But, the James Bond franchise. Imagine if the James Bond movies all had to have James Bond in the title. That would have been rough, right? But getting into Superfly today, which is our movie. So what, like, kind of before we get into our thoughts on it, like, what's kind of been your relationship with this movie? When did you first see it? Like, did you see it when you were young? Like, how did this movie come into your life?
I first saw Superfly, I want to say in college is when I saw Superfly first. I know and Shaft's going to come up a lot just because they tend to run side to side with me. But like, I know I've seen Shaft first. I know that because I specifically wanted to see it before the new Shaft. I hadn't seen it in 2000 when Samuel Jackson's Shaft came out. So I wanted to see the original first before I saw it. Superfly was later for like, I'm in college in 04 to 08, so like I saw it around that because I was doing,
we're like the same age.
I didn't major in film, but I took film classes, so like, and I'm already obsessed with movies anyway, so I'm watching movies all, but like I watched it during that period, and I like Superfly quite a bit. I like Shaft quite a bit. I think Superfly to me is it's perhaps less iconic than Shaft. Like if you think blaxploitation, Shaft jumps out at you, right? Just like the song, I mean, it's like it's just there.
Yes.
Superfly, I think, is probably the better movie. And I say that because I think it has more ideas on its mind, and it has more for Ron O'Neal to do as far as his involvement in Black culture during this period. They're both very specific movies. They both have a lot to say about the times or whatnot in the direction and what have you. I think it's like splitting hairs a bit. Like it's not like they're like hugely different, but I appreciate Superfly for what it's going for and for just being a funky good time as well. It's like it's a big vibe of the movie. Like
I found it very different from Shaft. Shaft is a little bit more in terms of like its narrative structure. It's a little bit more, has a little bit more finesse to its plot.
Sure.
The scenes are a little bit, you feel like there's a little bit more technical expertise throughout Shaft.
That's fair. Yeah.
And in Superfly, you really got the sense of this like kind of fun indie vibe. It feels like, as I read later, the script was 45 pages long. So they had to kind of like, have longer scenes, lots of like, handheld, driving, walking, but it didn't. There was a certain vibe to this movie that I immediately took to, like from the first few minutes, that it felt like I said about Jackie Brown, like a hangout movie. Like this felt more of like kind of a hangout movie with these characters than Shaft does, which is, I felt like a little bit more about its plot than
it's
this
essentially a hard-boiled noir. It just
Yeah.
happens to be focused in, in Black society. It has things to say
Yeah.
in that regard, and it's interesting in that way. But yeah, it has a narrative that it's holding on to kind of push it forward. Where Superfly, that what I like a lot about it is that Ron O'Neal's character, he's like, it's in a lot of films of the 70s are like this. The plot is not the most important aspect of it. It's like there's a plot that's going to happen and people are going to have an arc of some kind, but like he's at this place where he's already himself, this cooler than cool guy for what he is as far as being a dope dealer. But he's doing his thing and he's like, maybe I just don't want this. Maybe I just want to do my own thing.
I love that.
And a lot of the movie is like, I'll just interact with different people, showing my concerns with being this guy. And that's it. Like that's pretty much the movie. But I like that because it's constantly involving him within his world. So you're seeing a lot of it where, again, it's not a Shaft podcast, but it's like Shaft is interesting to me. It's like, it's still good. But it's certainly, you have Roundtree, who's also cooler than cool.
Yeah.
And he's a guy that he's risen to a certain place where he lives in Greenwich Village. He's not as connected to the Black community as he once might have been or whatnot. And that's an interesting thing to think about as far as what Shaft looks like today, as far as why was this guy raised so high? Well, it's like, well, he's a cop, he's a private detective, he's doing good for the society or whatnot, but he's also separated from it. That's not saying the dope dealer is a better guy. He's not. But I mean, if anything, he's like, I guess, an anti-hero, but like not like a Travis Bickle kind of anti-hero. He's not like murdering people. He deals drugs. Like which is not good, but there are layers there as far as like what his perspective is on things of this time or what have you. So it's I like, and plus on top of all this, you have Curtis Mayfield's brilliant soundtrack.
Oh my gosh, the music is a character in the movie by far, more so I think even than Shaft. I mean, the music really makes this what it is.
It's the better of the two. Like Shaft has an iconic theme, no doubt. The theme from Shaft is absolutely deserving of his Oscar. It is an iconic song. It's one of the best Oscar wins for best original song of all time.
Oh yeah.
But on the whole, the soundtrack for Superfly is better. Like it is a better soundtrack. It has great songs. It has a great use of them throughout the movie, including just having Curtis Mayfield and his band just be in the movie.
In the movie. I did not expect that.
Yeah.
That was cool.
And just doing all of Pusher Man. And not because like it matters, because like, hey, we're in this club. Why don't we just watch Curtis for a while? Okay, guys, and then we do that in the movie before we like, okay, now let's continue on with the story.
Yeah, that's when I knew the movie was not in a rush. Was when
exactly.
I mean, doesn't he play like the whole song? And I'm just like I'm rocking out to this. Is great, but I'm like, there's not really a push forward here.
You hear it from the outside, like you're watching him drive or whatever, and then you get into the club, and it's like, oh, there he is. Like, oh, so we're just doing this now.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised. I mean, maybe this movie just not. I mean, it looked like from what I read online that this movie was very popular. Like, I'm wondering, why does Shaft get not only original song at the Oscars, it also was nominated for score.
It's a studio film. That's why.
Because it's a studio film, it just had more push at the end of the year.
Warner Brothers could have, or MGM at that time, could afford to put a campaign together for a movie like Shaft, which would they're both hits, but Shaft. I mean, Gordon Parks, this is the way we talk about the directors yet, but Gordon Parks for Shaft, and his son directs Superfly, which is very humorous to me.
At the beginning, because I really try when I watch a movie that I haven't seen before for the podcast, I try not to read up on it at all. And since it says Gordon Parks Jr., and I'm like, wait, the director of Shaft did this? No, that's not right. That's not the same guy. But the name sounded familiar. And then when the movie ended, I'm like, oh, it's his son.
And that's, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think he tried to get it done faster than Shaft. He wasn't successful, but I think there was something about he wanted to get it out before his father had Shaft out. But regardless, Shaft is it's a studio film. Gordon Parks, notably the first Black director to get to make a movie of this kind of size for a major studio. It has that backing. Where Superfly, it's an indie.
So do we think the success of Shaft allows for Gordon Parks Jr. to make Superfly, or was Superfly going to happen regardless?
I think it was because it's independent, so I think it's going to happen regardless, but it didn't hurt. It certainly didn't hurt. It probably didn't hurt in the marketing campaigns or for these kind of things, as well as from you've seen Shaft, you've seen Badass, now see Superfly.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure like because of Shaft's success, a lot of people when they saw the advertising for Superfly could like get a sense of the kind of movie they were going to go see.
Yeah, because that's the thing about the success. Like, it's not just like Black audiences are going to see Shaft and seeing Superfly and seeing Foxy Brown and seeing Cleopatra Jones. It's like it's this, you're depicting a very specific time in mainly New York, and I mean, like, and Shaft is pretty universal. It's a private eye doing his thing, but and you have these soundtracks which are popular as well. The music is, especially in the 70s, music's huge for a lot of movies as far as packaging all this together to make something to market. So yeah, you have something that can not only capture the appeal of Black audience, but everybody. As far as that's not to say like the movies didn't end racism, or they didn't stop. They didn't, we're talking about diversity in films today still, so it's not like it bridged all the gaps, but people certainly saw it more than just certain people. So it didn't hurt to have Shaft come along, be a success, have Superfly come along, be a success, have more. There's a reason why the blaxploitation era is a notable part of the history books. It's because it was an era that was successful for a lot of people.
Yeah, and then we get the sequel to this. We get at least a couple big movies with Pam Grier, right? And was it Coffee and Foxy Brown, or just right after this?
Yeah,
I think they're like 73, 74. Yes. I mean, she was in a film we talked about for the podcast last year, The Big Dollhouse, like a prison exploitation film from 71. That was like her first big movie. Like I think she was like a receptionist. Like that was how she got into the industry. She was like working at some building, and then worked her way into acting, and then becomes one of the big stars of the mid 70s in films like Coffee and Foxy Brown.
Wouldn't surprise me. I mean, there's so much about this is like present, like Richard Roundtree. That's his first movie.
Yeah, he kind of came out of nowhere too, right?
Yeah, and it's obviously they're doing something to win producers or casting directors over, what have you. But a lot of it is just like who can they picture on a poster that's gonna like, that's part of it. If you have Richard Roundtree rocking a very, very manicured natural, or you have Ron Jones with his very, very processed and straightened out hair. Put on the poster, put him in a suit, like that's a good part of it. Like I know Shaft's marketing campaign, and probably I assume most of the blaxploitation films, famously handled by Black PR firms. To very much put out a certain kind of image that's gonna show things off to an audience a certain kind of way.
So we mentioned the music. The movie's one nomination anywhere of anything it got was a Grammy Award nomination for Best Original Score written for a motion picture or a television special for Curtis Mayfield. It did not win. It should have. But why is that the only nomination? I just feel like that music especially should have gotten in at some bigger awards. I don't know.
I mean, history is what it is, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's probably some very deserving people that won Grammys and Oscars that year. Superfly, one of the best soundtracks of all time.
No, it really is great. Like, I'm assuming I can, like, does it have like a soundtrack available today? Like I can, I can download all the songs.
It's been remastered multiple times.
That's awesome.
There's special editions of the Superfly. I'm sure it's on vinyl for all the vinyl collectors out there. I'm sure it's on Spotify.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I really like, some movies have a score and you notice it or you don't. This movie, you notice it. It really becomes its own character. And that's something you don't see in every film, especially a lot of these early 70s films. Some movies we talked about, I'm like, did it have a score? Like, was there music? Like, you can't even remember. And that's not the case with this movie.
For sure. You get this funky vibe throughout the thing that it just works. Like it's watching it again, trying to pay attention to like certain things, it functions like a Greek chorus a lot of like a lot of times. The way the music, the way the lyrics specifically are commenting on what's taking place. It's not Mickey Mousing it. It's not like saying, and then this happened, and then this happened, like within the score. But it's a film that's aware of the movie. The music's aware of the movie it's in, and it has very reflective themes based off of given moments within the film that it's neat to listen to beyond just being good music. You have some very choice lyrics that reflect being a pusher man, and or what Superfly is great. I mean, even without the TNT, Superfly, still a great title. You still got Ron Jones, and like a title that like justifies itself, right? You're like, how you call a movie Superfly, and you have some guy that's a nerd. Like, no, this guy, he walks in, he's got the hair, he's got the suits. Every scene, he's got some kind of costume that looks great. He's got his whip, right? He's got the El Dorado. It looks like it's great. Like, this guy's like, yeah, he's Superfly. Like, he's got it all going for him.
I wonder what the audition process was like. So he had been in 2 films before this. Ron O'Neal, he'd been in Move, a comedy from 1970 with Elliot Gould. Okay. And then he was in The Organization with Sidney Poitier in 71. So it wasn't like he came out of nowhere. He'd been in 2 pretty big films of those first 2 years of the decade. So I'm curious, like if he auditioned for this, did he come in with the look and the outfit? Like, I wonder how that all came to be. I couldn't find anything about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but
it would have been great if he walked in with this outfit on. He's like, I'm this guy. Do not hire anyone else. So this film was directed by Gordon Parks Jr. What did we think of his directing of this movie?
For being a first film, I think it is more than competently directed. I think it is. Especially if a movie that is based famously on a very short script and has to do a lot of improvisation, working on an indie budget, what have you, working with not necessarily amateurs, but certainly people that aren't like veterans of the industry. Accounting for all of that, I think the movie has a lot of style. It brings a lot of the New York authenticity of that time. Like, that's what you want to look for in a movie from 1971 made for, I assume, under $1 million.
Yeah, it was under 500,000 if I read correctly.
There you go.
Yeah.
So for a movie like that needs to get you to commit to the idea that this is the coolest guy around, and he's a drug dealer, but you need to be behind him the whole way and see this world that he occupies. It does the job. Like, I think there's like a few montages that use like split screen or whatnot. There's like some 70 tricks. Gotta get you in the zone for what he's doing and what have you. I think it has that style, even with the minimal action that it has. It goes for like a peck and paw slow motion type of thing, which is like, that's fun, I guess. I think if the focus of the movie is on reflecting New York at that time and constantly trying to make you understand Ron O'Neal is always the coolest guy in the frame, I think it accomplishes those things.
Yeah, I thought he was very inventive as a filmmaker in this. It's a low budget movie. Taking a very short script to make it 90 minutes is not easy, but I never was like, okay, this is clearly stretching out a 2-minute scene into 10 minutes. I never really felt that. And I liked all of the different tricks he used, especially in that photo montage scene, which you mentioned, which I believe at the beginning of the movie, he also has a credit, not just directed by, but it says like photo compilation or something by. I'm like, what does that refer to? That's weird. I've never seen that. And what is that scene? 4 minutes?
Yeah, it's
it's just like a photo montage to Curtis Mayfield music, right? It's Mayfield's music. Yeah. And I was like, I don't think I've ever seen something like this in a movie before, but it kind of went with the rhythm of the scene that came before and came after. And it didn't feel like, oh shit, we're at 80 minutes. We need to put some. It didn't feel like that at all. It felt like the right place for that scene. And I thought it worked well.
Yeah, for a 90-minute movie, it has a lot of breathing room in it, which is impressive to make that happen, make you feel comfortable and not like, when are we getting to the fireworks factory? It's like, no, this is just, I'm just enjoying the vibe of this. That's why I call it a vibe movie. Like, it has so much, it has things to say about society in that time and what have you, but it's still like a cool groove of a film. So it's like, I don't care that I'm not rushing to see what Priest does next.
And we also have some sexuality in the movie, which Shaft had some of that too. I thought in Superfly that was handled even better. Like, it's really, there's that scene in the bathtub that's very erotic, and the way it's shot, and like it feels like, we're voyeurs into this moment of these two people. And I thought that was all handled well. There wasn't too much of it. I felt like there was just enough to really get the sense of him, how he is with women and things like that.
It's funny because, like, I don't disagree as far as like, it's well made for what it's doing. It does feel like of the things in this movie, that feels the one thing that's like long, where it's like, we're taking a lot of time here. Where like Shaft has a couple scenes that are like shot more reservedly, but also they don't occupy a lot of time. Like, it's more like, you get the idea. Shaft has his way with the ladies of all brands. Like, that's where this one, like, like, yeah, you understand that he's super, like, he obviously, he has a way with everybody, so he has a way with women, but it's like they shot it like a really slow music video.
Yeah. No, I mean, it does take its time a little bit, but I'm just like, this is the kind of scene you never see anymore. Like, there's something about some of the sexuality, some of these early 70s films rated R that you don't really see nowadays. And so I don't know, there was something about that I thought was interesting.
There's a purity to it.
Yeah. So yeah, that and then in terms of violence, I felt like Shaft was much more violent. Like, we saw more blood, there was more gore. I felt like in Superfly, that element was pretty tame. Would you agree with that? Like, it wasn't a whole lot of violence or gore and things like that.
I would, and I think it's a reflection. I mean, obviously, it's a reflection of the plotting, right? Shaft is a detective story, so there needs to be specific kinds of villains and a specific kind of rising action that you lead to. So you have to fight underlings along the way to get to the main boss or what have you. Where this one is, because it's so much more about, like, if Shaft is a cop drama, this is a character drama, right? That's really what it is. Like, there's stuff in it, but there's stuff in every movie. So this is like just watching Priest have intellectual conversations with his friends or with his relationships or with the people that oppose him. And so there's really like maybe 2 bits of action. One's at the beginning when people try to mug him, and he has that really long street chase, which is like, this keeps going. There's a lot. And then there's the fight at the end, basically, where it's just like more of a means to an ends than like a necessary action sequence. So it doesn't capitalize off that because it doesn't really need to. The guy's Superfly. Like, I think a lot of why he's in the standing he has as far as being a meditative dope dealer is because he doesn't put himself in situations where he have to fight people. Like, I think specifically, like, because at that time with these kinds of people, you have dope dealers and you have pimps, right? And Superfly, although it might confuse people that aren't familiar and they just make assumptions, Superfly's not a pimp. Not only is he not a pimp, he doesn't like pimps. He doesn't want to be a pimp. He threatens that to one person at one point. You can see that he feels bad about it. It's like, I don't want to like be that guy. I do my own thing, which is dealing drugs, which is, again, I need to keep emphasizing, not a good thing. People are a little like less crazy about how they used cocaine back in that day. Doesn't make cocaine great, but it is what it is. But because he's that kind of guy, because he's a dealer who seems to have found his focus and found a level of respectability as far as among his peers, what have you, he's not the guy that's putting himself in dangerous situations on a constant level, right? So there's a reason why he can have his hair and have his car and have his clothes and none of it ever gets messed up, because he doesn't find himself fighting all the time.
Yeah. That's how I think Shaft's a little different. Shaft has some moments that are a little bit quieter, but it builds up to a big action set piece that goes on for at least 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
And there's a shootout, there's blood and people flying out of windows and things. And so you get that big action ending. This movie, it has a little bit of that at the end, but it's not the same. It's a quieter kind of confrontation scene. It kind of ends more with dialogue than anything else. And whenever there is a moment of, like, I think some guy gets punched in the face or something, and a guy gets hit by a car. And some of that was, in terms of editing and things, it was a little shaky, right? Like, the guy who gets hit by the car, it's like they're doing every trick they can to make this look real, but it's like, you know.
It's the kind of, it comes with the territory kind of thing, which is fine. I mean, the takeaway by the time you get to the ends of both of these movies, which have one has, like you just described, an action finale versus the other that has more of a not a negotiation, more of a, like, whatever, an exchange of words, a tension-filled exchange of words, I guess. What I do like about both finales is that they, for this time, because you're getting movies like this that have Black heroes at the center of them, you have their people, they win. I mean, it's unique for the time, especially for this kind of movie. Sure, you have Poitier doing certain kinds of movies, but his kind of, and Poitier is great. I just did a podcast about Poitier. He's a fantastic actor.
Like, you talked about a lot of his films.
We did like a retrospect because he passed away. We talked about, like, his
he just passed away recently, right? Just a few months ago.
This past year, but like his kind of thing was he's playing dignified, respectable characters, which is completely fine. Nothing wrong with that. But that's his area where he was concentrated on as far as the kinds of roles he was taking. With Shaft and Superfly and the blaxploitation era, you have what's essentially just the same as the regular action movies and cop dramas that are the same as, Bullets or what have you, if they're playing cops or whatnot, but except it's a black lead, which is unique in and of itself, and they're winning. They're the person you're following, and they succeed at the end. And so a movie like Superfly rules because the way it ends, you have this character that has already assured himself that he will be fine, and then he just gets to tell off the evil white man. Like, that's the whole deal at the end, where it's like, even regardless of where this fight goes that happens, he already has like an insurance policy. And so like the ending is like he pulls up in his whip, he takes like 2 bumps and just starts talking to this guy who's like a corrupt police detective, right? And just like makes fun of him using we'll get to as far as the lens of how this movie looks now, but like he very specifically chides him and just says, "You can't do anything to me, I'm out of here," and goes. And that's it. Like, that's the end of this movie. Like, and it's 70s, right? So you don't need the epilogues like you do these days, where it's like, now let's have 20 more minutes of character wrap up. This is
my gosh,
you did the thing,
I hate that.
Walked away, credits.
Especially in action films and thrillers, I love the movies where when the story's over, we're out. I don't like when it hangs around for another 10 minutes. I don't care if you got some clever little coda for the last fight, like, just we're out. I like that. This movie has that. It doesn't stick around.
These are 2 wild examples, but like when I first started noticing that was 70s, the French Connection. When I first saw the French Connection, where that movie, you have all these things happen with Popeye Doyle. He finds the French guy, he gets away. Spoilers for the French Connection, but regardless,
we've already talked about that one.
Like the stuff happens, and after that, Papa Doyle just like slams his fist down. Movie's over. Like, it's done. It's not like, now let's get Roy Scheider and Gene Hackman back to the station to talk about the things that happened. It's like, no, the movie's done. Like, we edited it. Compared to something like Solo, where they do the Kessel Run, and it's like, cool, they did the Kessel Run, that's awesome. Why is there 40 more minutes? Like, what else do we need to see about Han Solo at this point? It's like, he did the thing.
And it boggles my mind when the movie could have comfortably been over at an hour 40, and then there's another 30 minutes tacked on. It's like, why? I mean, it's going to cost more money. It prevents fewer people from seeing it day to day in a theater to have another 30 minutes. It's like, keep the movie shorter.
Who are we catering to? Like, that's the thing. It's like, who's the one complaining? Like, yeah, but they didn't like go back home and talk about their stuff afterwards. I don't know, B-. Like, what? Like, I don't know.
Like, nobody's sticking around, like, unless they're really, I guess, invested in the characters and stuff. Like, it's like,
which
no,
you can be. And there's certainly films that do this, well. I'm not saying it's impossible to make a movie that has an extended third act or whatever.
Oh yeah.
It's just, it is an interesting thing about 70s movies specifically, where it feels like they get in and they get out, and it's like, fine.
Yeah, I mean, outside of some like costume dramas and some things I've looked at for this podcast in the last 2 years, there's really not a lot of long films, unless you have like The Godfather that needs to be its length.
Yeah, the epics.
Yeah, but like the smaller films, like they don't go on longer than an hour 40, really, ever. Like, they're short, and I like that. We just talked about a movie a few days ago called Prime Cut, also starring Gene Hackman.
Oh, yeah.
It's Lee Marvin. You've heard that? So it's 85 minutes long, and it has like a big action finale and a final scene of kind of wrapping things up. And it's 85 minutes. I'm like, good on you, movie.
Exactly.
The older I get, the more I like the 90-minute running time. When I put something. Unless it's a specific kind of movie that I want to be longer, and there are those.
It's funny because I can agree with you. My lovely girlfriend definitely agrees with you. She's like, why is the movie's 90 minutes? Like, why? I told her Jurassic World was 2 hours and 2.5 hours.
2.5 hours.
She's like, why? I'm like, I don't know. It doesn't need to be that long. But then you have movies like, I don't know if you've seen RRR yet.
No, I've heard great things. Is that long?
It's 3 hours and 7 minutes or something like that. I've seen it twice, like, and I can't, in theaters, and I can't wait to see it another time because it rules. Like, but that said, it justifies every damn minute of that running time. It's such a insane, epic action film. So
yeah, what is it? Roger Ebert said, "No good movie is too long, no bad movie is too short." If the movie earns every scene and it goes for 3 hours, many of my favorite films are very, very long. And
for sure, when
you don't feel the length, that's when you know it's working.
Exactly, yeah. And that's another area where I think Shaft and Superfly clash, because I think Superfly feels exactly what it needs to be, where I think Shaft sags a little bit in the middle. So.
Okay, yeah, I agree. Like, Shaft, because it has a little bit more polish, it's a little bit more about its central case and plot. It does have some of those, like, I mean, were there are at least 3 or 4 scenes in Shaft where they're just like at the detective's office and they're in like a room talking about the case. Like you don't really get a lot of that in Superfly. It's more about behavior and relationships. It's not so much about let's sit down and give the audience exposition.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the thing, right? Because the lack of plot is it helps the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as you just mentioned a few minutes ago, so I wanted to ask you, like, how do you think this film holds up today in 2022? Looking at this movie from today, like how does it hold up? Do you think over a 50-year period? I mean, it's a little. It's some of these movies. It's like it's weird to watch them today because film is so much different now than it was back in the 70s. But
I mean, it's a weird question because it's like I know this film enough.
Yeah,
and it's like, how do you approach this? Like as like a film student that's never seen blaxploitation before, what have you? It's like if you look at it now, like obviously there are some like gay slurs that take place because that's just the kind of way to throw insults at people back in that time.
Yep.
That's not me justifying it. That's just me saying that's what it was like. And it's like, yeah, that doesn't register as well, but I understand the period that it's coming out of. So it's like, I can fault it as far as the morality, but I can't fault it as far as like, yeah, that is like what a person of that time would say to somebody, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I'm reading a book right now called The Celluloid Closet, which had a documentary in the 90s all about the history of homosexuality in cinema. And I'm reading the chapter right now all about like the late 60s, the mid 70s. And just like it talks about how it was really difficult for filmmakers to just have a gay character. And it's just a different time.
Which Shaft does, by the way.
Shaft has a great scene, which we talked about, was at the bar. Yeah. Like the bartender's gay and he talks about it and it's not weird. And I'm like, this is really progressive for 1971, which is but yeah, that's something we've talked about in the podcast a lot. Like sometimes I struggle if there's even one moment in a movie that I'm into and then they say, the F word, or they say something that just like, it takes me out. That can be tricky because you're watching these films from a long period of time since, but it can still kind of hurt 50 years on if it's done really distastefully or hateful, especially if it's from like the main character who we want to like. So you have to. It's a tricky balance there. I've found
it can be for sure. And so outside of that, like as far as the film as a whole, like I think it from watching it today, like from that perspective, what it does well is serve as a good time capsule. And I think that's because of how it captures New York, where it's not like you're walking into Superfly being like, I hope this really reflects the politics of 2022. It's like, you want to see a movie that's showing you, for one thing, like presumably, it's an indie movie just from the look of the thing to begin with. But it's reflecting a time when someone considered cool is a guy that deals cocaine. Like, I mean, so someone that has his life together is this person that you're watching, and you're seeing how he ingratiates himself into the society of that time. And everyone, for the most part, gives him a level of respect. It certainly wants to show the divided lines as far as, black characters versus the generally corrupt white people that are around him, specifically people in power. And in that regard, matches up pretty well to today. It's it has, I think it has plenty for going forward as far as being an artifact from a certain time period that happens to be very enjoyable and funky and everything.
Yeah, and I think you have to look a lot of these, especially ones like these, kind of the lower budget films of the early 70s. You really have to, if you were to just put this on and watch it like you would a movie released now, it's not going to hold up. So you have to kind of look at it in the context of how it was made and when it came out. Like, it helps.
Yeah, certainly something that's grounded and gritty, like a movie like this. Like I just watched one of my favorite movies, The Warriors. It got a new release.
Oh, from 79, I want to say.
79, yeah. Walter Hill's The Warriors.
Hill.
And that's a movie that's set in like the future where gangs have taken over New York, but the future is like, it's the 70s. So it's like, what's the future look like? It's like, yeah, it's just now, but people dress slightly different or whatever. It's not like there's hover cars. It's just like this version of New York that's been overrun by gangs. And I'm not going to say that movie's timeless, but you look at it through 2022 and it's like, yeah, it's that 70s sci-fi, not like, I guess, Logan's Run or something, but it's still like it's a very specific version of what you're trying to show you of what a society could look like. Where Superfly, this is that. This is exactly that. This is that time. It's that time and place. The things that happen are things that would presumably happen. Priest is not he's not a superhero. He's not anything more than what he is. He's a grounded human being. And so you just kind of had to accept the movie as being a depiction of this specific place and time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think these movies are really cool when they're shot on location, like Shaft and Superfly are, because you really get a sense of early 70s New York that you can't often get in a movie that's shot on a soundstage or something. Like there's something about
they're great New York
tangible
movies.
Quality. Like when they're out on the sidewalks and in cars on the street, like you really get a sense of what that city looked like in 71 and 72, which is really fun.
A choice that they both open with is having a giant like bird's eye view crane shot of both characters just walking in the street. And it feels entirely like within there's no substituting that. Like there's no other way to look at it except they just filmed these guys walking on the street. Like that's what they did.
Yeah, and you can really tell. It's fantastic. So my last question about the film before we move on to the final two segments, it's a little tricky, right? Because we do have a remake from 2018, but I always ask of each guest, like, if they made this story now, like, what would it look like? So I don't know if you want to touch on the remake, if you just want to talk just in general about like cinema in 2022, like how do you take this story and update it to 2022? Like how does it look for audiences today?
Well, I'll note right now that the remake, it's pretty good. Like it's not a bad movie. I believe it sets it in Atlanta specifically.
It said Atlanta. I watched the trailer before we came on here. It said Atlanta.
Yeah. And it was made in 2018. It's very specifically made in the midst of like Trump era. That's not saying it has like a bunch of people with MAGA signs, but it's in terms of like there's a scene where there's a car chase and one bad guy ends up crashing into like a statue of a Confederate of Lee, I believe. Lee, a general.
Okay.
Lee statue.
Oh, okay, interesting.
It was like little like there's jabs like that going on. It's like that's the same summer as like Black Klansman came out, where obviously dealing more heavily into the Trump era. But as far as like that movie, and I can say this in general, as far as what it would be to make a movie like this today in relation and with that remake in mind, it kind of handles it. You're still dealing with like, drug dealers, a drug dealer that's the center of your hero. And that movie has a character who has the priest character. He has the hair is not the same, but he still has very stylish and notably different hair than like other black characters around him. I forget what the car is, but he has a fancy car. He dresses stylishly. It treats it more like that movie treats it more like a superhero origin story without any superpowers or anything. Like that's what it feels like. Again, not a bad movie. It's not perfect, but it's not like it's. You have Superfly is coming out at a very specific time, right? There's civil rights activity still going on. There's Black Power. There's all kinds of other counterculture type of things taking place. So like Superfly and it's within the budding blaxploitation era. You can't like just recapture that because you've chosen to, right? So it's different. So you make that movie today. Obviously, you'd center it around things like putting a character within the midst of Black Lives Matter and within the politics of the time, within the use of the term woke culture or what have you. That doesn't mean that the character would necessarily interact with any of these people, but it's certainly beyond the mind, I think, of the community he's involved with, right? And like the kinds of people that would be his adversaries would, it's probably still be pretty much similar to what this movie's offering you, right? It'd be people that are trying to take advantage, that are, in a higher class, probably white, that would want to, keep you enslaved to your profession that you've managed to make a living in and use it for their own gains. Is it so like obviously it's possible to make it because they made a remake, but if you were to center it in like New York or LA, I don't know New York well enough as far as like I know plenty about it. I just haven't been there, but like I don't know what it would be like to make a movie that's like specifically about this drug dealer in this city at this time, right, to signify some kind of I don't know what you would capitalize on to like replicate whatever Superfly is doing in the 70s. But is there a way to do it? I think again, obviously they did it, but is there a way to do it in a way that would capture that kind of feel? That's impossible to like really say unless it's like the best movie. But I do think there's room for movies that can take a character that occupies this kind of nebulous space between good and bad and throw him in there and see what his reflections are as far as being that guy that wants to kind of move his life along and away from being a drug dealer.
Yeah. Were there any scenes in the 72 that translated in any way to the 2018 version, or is it just completely different?
Like, it's not good. No, like it follows it has more of a plot by default because that's how movies are now.
Yeah.
But it does like it has the Eddie character in this movie. There's an Eddie character in the remake as well, like two like best friends that are basically at odds as far as, Priest wants to move on with his life and not keep doing this, where Eddie's like, we're living the American dream. What do we want to give up here? They reflect those kind of ideas in this new one.
Is there a musical performance on stage?
It has it because I believe it's Director X.
Director.
I believe he's like a music video director. Like he's in that world. And certainly there's a lot, like it had a huge sound. Like these movies by default always have huge soundtracks. So like this movie had a big soundtrack. I don't know how successful it was, but it certainly had a lot of artists of 2018 or what have you.
Yeah.
I don't recall it specifically having like a let's stop and listen to music sequence, but it's certainly like it's wall to wall music, that's for sure. I mean, that's you're not going to replicate that already.
I'd be very curious to know how many people went to see the new one in 2018 and then went on to watch the original. I wonder if there was any like for those people who maybe don't know as much about film history. I wonder how many of them saw the new one and then sought out the 72 original or knew of it and got to see it later. I don't know.
I mean, granted, Superfly 2018 didn't do well, pretty much bombed I assume it didn't cost much. It probably wasn't a huge loss as far as the money's concerned, but I always like to think that people that see remakes, specifically of things like that are pretty unique as opposed to just like big thing gets another big thing. I like to think that people go back in time to like look at what the original thing was like, and that's why I'm not opposed to remakes in particular, because I always say this, I'm not against remakes, I'm against bad movies. Like if the movie's good, like I don't care if it was remade, like but for film cinephiles or just people that are just generally interested, that should be the goal in something like this. It's like, what, why stop here? Which is also why you can't revisit every movie just because there's not enough time in the world, but it's like much like art, you don't look at a painting once, right? So you can look at films and find new things about them. You can look at a remake and look at the past version and see, find new ways to make connections on stuff, and just find other ways to be interested in the movie beyond just what the story is, what that cast did, and what happened. You can explore it. And
I've also been fascinated the older I get. When I look at a film now, I'll have a different experience with it than I did 10 years ago or when I was in high school. Like you really do, some films kind of evolve and you're like, oh, I didn't like this when I was 17. Now I think it's brilliant. And then vice versa. And that's so interesting to me, how something stays the same, but we change in the way we think and in our lives and relationships. And then you look at something 20 years on, you're like, that's why I do this podcast. That's why I also like looking at films on its 20th anniversary or 30th anniversary, because you get a different experience each time, which is cool.
Entirely agree. And it's why I don't watch a lot of films that I enjoyed as a child too often. I've never been a fan of Hook, so it's not like I'm going back to Hook and being like, oh, this was bad. It's like, I've never really been a fan of Hook. I'm a contrarian, I guess, in that matter, as far as my generation's concerned when it comes to that movie. But
I will always defend Hook.
But when it comes to something like Three Ninjas, it's like I enjoyed John Turtletub's Three Ninjas plenty of times when I was a child. Have I watched it many times since? No. Am I going to watch it and be like, oh man, this is still amazing? Probably not. Will I watch it again at some point and be like, you know what? I get why I liked it? Probably.
Probably the biggest example of a movie I've definitely evolved on. My favorite film in high school was American Beauty, which is a film today that is kind of difficult to talk about and to watch. And so that's definitely one that's been an evolution for me. I'm like, not my favorite anymore.
I get that. There are some things that are undeniable about that movie, as far as the things that I think
some artistry in that movie for sure, which I'll always defend. But there's also elements of the movie. It makes it hard to watch now.
Yeah, and even just when you think about what the story is like, this guy is he just decides he wants to do this thing to get this person. Like, that's weird. We're rooting for him.
Yeah. But I mean, obviously we weren't around in 71, 72 to, see some of these movies. I'm always fascinated by like, what was the experience like to see some of these films opening weekend in 71, 72.
Oh, for sure.
I really would love to have seen Superfly with a giant audience in August 72. Would have been, I bet it would have been just a kick. It would have been really cool.
It's fun, you know, you have so many movies now where, blockbuster particularly, where there's moments where the filmmakers are aware of like applaud moments to the point of we need to delay dialogue because they'll probably, like something like Spider-Man No Way Home, when when Andrew Garfield shows up, you can tell that there's like, we need breathing room for people to stop reacting to this before characters start having dialogue to each other.
We have to have a 17-second pause before you talk.
Where movies from back in the day, there's not a, you know, you're not anticipating that. So you have scenes where, you know, Priest is doing something or like slaps a guy or whatever, and it's like, audience is probably going nuts. So like seeing something like that opening night in a New York theater with like an all-black audience being like, this, look at this guy, like this is great. So that's the kind of like genuine, authentic experience that you can certainly enjoy. There's nothing wrong with cheering at Spider-Man. I'm not saying that. That's fine. It's just that you can't plan for certain things like you can back then.
Oh, for sure. So any final thoughts on Superfly? I really had a good time with it. It took, like, I was like, okay, this isn't going to be super plot heavy like Shaft was in some respects. So it took me like 20 minutes to kind of find its rhythm. And then I really got into it and I enjoyed it. I had a good time.
No, that's fair. I mean, it's, especially if you're going in largely blind. It's not a movie it's not untypical. Like you know, but it is a film that marches to its own beat and, you know, wants to do its thing the way it does. The final thing I'll say is just it does it with so much style, right? It has all the suits that priests wear are all like just wonderful as far as that kind of 70s look goes, like big collars and coats and hats and everything. Like it's just really has this cool thing going on throughout the movie, and obviously he has his car and that hair.
That facial hair is great.
So it's just I really like the vibe that it's throwing at you in terms of its style and what have you. I think it's captured well on film, and seeing it even now, it's not like it doesn't. I wouldn't say it looks corny. It just looks cool. Like it looks like it not only does it match the time, but you look at that and you'd be like, if you're throwing like a retro 70s party, it's like, here's a guide for how to do some of that right there.
And I'm curious to watch the sequel next year. I don't know if I'll do an episode about it, but I'll definitely watch it. Do you know anything about the sequel? Like what it's about? Like I'm curious to know what the sequel's about.
No, I know. I never ventured to TNT, so I'm not too sure.
So I'll have to check that out.
Especially because he gave up. He retired. So it's like, what pulls him back into the game?
Yeah, that was my thinking too when this ended. I was like, well, so what's the second one about? I mean, it comes out very quickly, so there must be some kind of a plot that brings him back in, or like it can't just be him just like having a nice easy life. That's not going to be much of a movie. So I'd be curious to know how they pull him back in.
What if that is the movie? It's like, yeah, it's just him retiring.
just once. Just give us a sequel to a big, like a sequel where nothing happened. They were just like enjoying their retirement.
That's basically like Magic Mike XXL. Like that's the one example. It's like, yeah, they just kind of hang out.
Oh, isn't there a third one coming? Didn't they just shoot a third one?
Yep.
More Magic Mike. All right, I guess. And then, do you know anything about Return of Superfly from 1990?
No.
So it's not Ron O'Neal. It's like a different.
Yeah.
So Nathan Purdie is Superfly in that, is Priest. And then Margaret Avery, Oscar-nominated actress from The Color Purple, she's in that. And as I said before, Samuel L. Jackson.
Sam Jackson, some kind of appearance.
I didn't see like any amazing critiques about it. I can't imagine it's great, but I am intrigued now to see the 2018 remake to see just how different it is.
My expectations were very low because, like, okay, Superfly, but I was impressed that it did what it was trying to do rather well. You know,
they should do a super bad Superfly.
Well, you say that the movie just released. It was at Sundance. It just released on Amazon. We just did an episode on it on the podcast. Emergency is basically super bad, but told from the Black perspective. And grounded real world. Like it's not like trying to be stylish like Superfly, but you mentioning that does bring up an idea. It's like, what if you had Black characters in a super bad movie?
Okay,
that's what Emergency is.
And it's called and it's pretty good.
Yeah, I enjoy it. I think it's balanced in the line of being a comedy and being like kind of a thriller just by nature of the plot. But I certainly, see, you can stream it on Prime and it's 90 minutes. Not a bad investment. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Check it out. All right. So that takes us to our final two segments. The first one's the Divine double feature. So Superfly ends. What's something a little bit newer you would recommend to someone if they were to have a double feature? Like what would they put on second? That's either tied like thematically or stylistically. Anything at all? Like, what would you recommend that's newer?
So this was fun. I was trying. I thought of a few.
Okay.
There's one specifically that I'll get into more, but like other contenders like Black Dynamite.
Ooh, yeah.
Jai White. That movie's hysterical. It's a send up homage to blaxploitation films, and it's really just clever. Like that's certainly in terms of like the era. That's a fun recent double feature to do as far as seeing a movie that's from the era and a movie that's homaging it. Another one, Hustle and Flow. With the Craig Brewer film with Terrence Howard and his Oscar-nominated performance. He's great. In terms of like character arcs, they're very similar, where they're both in this game that they don't want to be in anymore, and they want to move on with their life and do something different. Like that's I found them to be very relatable to each other. But the film that I am choosing officially is Dope. Rick Famuyiwa's 2015 film.
I've heard of this. I don't think I've seen it.
It's a mix of like coming of age, urban comedy, and like the nature of being a black kid in a white world, essentially. It's about these three friends in Inglewood. They're all very smart, but they're also very dedicated to like 90s culture. Like they're nerds. They pronounce themselves as nerds. They're like nerds, geeks. And they get because they live in Inglewood, because of just the nature of their society, they get in that they live in. It is set in modern times, despite them being like 90s freaks. They get involved in a situation where they have possession of drugs, and they want to get rid of them. And they have to basically find out how to best accomplish that, which involves some very relevant themes involving cryptocurrency, actually, which is kind of neat for being a 2015 movie. But the film itself, I would pair these together because of the way these characters both function, where Priest is a guy who cooler than cool, is been in this game and wants to get out of it. The main character of Dope, who's played, what's his name? He's Miles Morales in the animated Spider-Man film.
Okay.
That's bugging me. But he's a character who's not cool by standards of the people around him, does not want to be in this world, but finds himself in it anyway and wants to get out. And I do think that there are parallels there that are interesting, as well as the movie's just very Dope is very stylish. It has a great soundtrack, mainly 90s rap hits. And so it's a movie that's trying to look back at a certain culture, where Superfly is a movie that's in the culture trying to look ahead. So I thought that'd be a fun, like, if you're putting two movies together, I thought that'd be an interesting way to go.
That's awesome. That title sounds very familiar to me. Was that a Sundance Film Festival movie?
It was a Sundance film, yeah.
I think that's where I read about it. And then I can't remember why. I'm in Reno, Nevada. We don't get a lot of indie films here, so sometimes those smaller films, they escape me. If it doesn't like drop on streaming one day and I see it like posted, like sometimes I miss it. So I will check out Dope for sure. It sounds great.
Yeah, it came out I think like this July or something, in a like limited release or what have you. And they tried to push it, but it's a small movie. So
okay, cool. I'll check it out. So so I went with Dolomite Is My Name, which is one of my favorite films the last few years, and it's obviously it's a more comedic, it's different stylistically in some ways than Superfly, but you do have the fantastic costume design, right? In Dolomite. And
denied an Oscar nomination.
That movie, I don't think that movie got a single Oscar nomination.
It did not. No.
I mean, I was pulling for Eddie Murphy. I just thought it was one of his best roles, best performances. I think he got a Golden Globe nom, but then he didn't get.
He didn't transfer over. Yeah.
Sometimes, and I talk about this a lot on my channel and stuff. Sometimes it's not that it's not worthy. It's like there's five slots, and there's 10 amazing performances, and only 5 can get in, and just kind of depends on the temperature of the moment, how it shakes out. But I just absolutely adored that movie, and it's easy to watch. It's on Netflix, right? So you can watch it anytime. And I love that story. I love the time period of the film. The directing of it was just stellar, and a great, just really good storytelling, great ensemble cast, and I really enjoyed that one. So that would be my choice.
Yeah. Snipes is so funny in that one too.
Wesley Snipes,
he's so good.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big action stars of the 90s, and then to see him come back in that role in Dolomite was really cool.
And you want to talk about characters too. Like, I do think there's a balance there as far as Priest and Rudy Ray Moore go, because you have Murphy, who again, he's a person that's similar to Priest, wants more from his life. He doesn't want to just be stuck in where he is. He feels like he has more of a calling to do something else. So it's there's interesting little connections like that. Yeah.
So that would be my choice. I'd also say I haven't seen it, but the Superfly remake would be interesting. We talk a lot about how film looks differently between 72 and 2022 to see, okay, here's a story that was done later. just 4 years ago. Would be interesting to watch that. I don't know. Would you recommend someone watch both back to back? I don't know if that would be the best way to do it. Maybe a week.
Yeah, it'd be weird to do it within the same day, but I do like they are different enough where it's not a film that feels like it's just copying the other one to make itself work. It does have enough differences in it, so it's not just like this, but 2018. Like it's a different movie. But yeah, again, yeah, you wouldn't be like, let's watch this movie and immediately put on this movie.
It's not that kind of double feature.
Yeah.
All right, very good. So that takes us to our final segment, Beyond the Flick. We typically pick an actor, director, or genre. I thought we talked about Ron O'Neal. Before we get to Ron O'Neal, I did want to mention, I forgot to mention early on, that the director of Superfly, Gordon Parks Jr., he was killed in a plane crash in 1979. He had made three more movies after Superfly. And then he was shooting in Kenya a movie called Revenge, and he and some of the camera crew passed away in a tragic plane crash incident, which I wanted to mention because it's really sad. Obviously, he had a lot of great films more to make, and just one of those tragedies that just it hurts. It's so unfortunate.
Yeah.
Gordon Parks, his father, he continued making films. He didn't have a lot of films after Shaft. I believe he passed away in the 2000s.
Yeah.
He made a few more movies after that. And then Ron O'Neal, he passed away in 2004, but he was acting all the way up to, I think his last credit is 2002. So he has credits from 1970 to 2002. And I have a couple quotes from him about working on Superfly, which I wanted to read. But anything you wanted to share about any other films you've seen him in, or television, or anything else you had to say about Ron O'Neal?
I recently watched The Final Countdown, which is I guess you call it a disaster movie. It's the premise is better than its execution, but it's got Kirk Douglas, Martin Sheen, Charles Durning, Catherine Ross, and Ron O'Neal. And it's about an aircraft carrier that in Pearl Harbor in 1980 that gets sucked into a vortex and appears on December 6th, 1941. So a day before the Pearl Harbor attacks. And the movie's basically about them debating whether or not they should tell the army about the impending attack that's going to happen on them.
Interesting.
It's really interesting, and I wish the movie was better.
That's too bad.
It's not bad. It's certainly worth a watch. I believe it's on Canopy right now as far as streaming.
Okay.
But Ron O'Neal's in it, and he's like just like one of the guys on the ship, like one of the higher ranking people. He doesn't leave like a huge impression, but the notable thing about it, he's Superfly, best hair. This movie, bald.
Does he go bald later in his career? He
doesn't go bald. I think he just. I assume that I assume he just like shaved his hair. Like he's notably like lacks hair. It's like
So he so he flunked out of Ohio State University. His acting career was triggered when he saw Finian's Rainbow by chance. It's something called the Caramoo House, a highly regarded non-professional company that had presented interracial casting since 1913. He won a chorus role in a musical and stayed with the company for 6 years. So that's how he got started. And then got into film in 1970. He was not super hot on the Superfly experience. Have you read any like his comments about the movie? And
I've heard things. Yeah.
He said at some point, the Superfly experience left me upset. Controversy served to obscure my performance, which was not an easy thing to pull off. Outside New York, people assumed I really was a hustler. Superfly took me from relative obscurity, but I haven't been offered that many roles since. So I feel like it's one of those roles where he became so like his name, his presence became so identified with the Superfly role. It probably was difficult for him in the second half of the 70s to find really juicy roles for him to sink his teeth into. I don't know.
That's the thing compared to Richie Roundtree, where you have a guy, you have a suave, cool looking dude playing, a private eye, playing someone that is a positive force in the community, versus, Youngblood Priest, who is a dope dealer, regardless of him being like the hero and the person that succeeds in the long run and even wants to get out of the business. He's still a drug dealer. Like the guy and the poster, which is great. You could easily assume that he's a pimp or something too, which is, it's, you get a certain look, and it's pretty much going to come down to like, he's, if you can't get Huggy Bear, you can get Ron O'Neal. Like that's kind of, which is unfortunate. And it's unfortunate that people, and the optics of this character and the kinds of people that are kind of say certain things about him as far as what he represents, like, well, he's an actor doing a job in a movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what it is. So it is, and yeah, I can understand having a certain kind of attitude about that as far as how people receive you and what opportunities are presented to you from there. I would get that you probably wouldn't be the most positive about a role that's considered your signature role, but is one that casts you as this kind of person during this time, at a time when there's varying stripes between Black society and others. Like it happens.
It's always an interesting conversation about any actor, how they're seen a certain way. If they're in one kind of role and is successful, then they'll often just be offered a lot of those kind of roles. And so it'll take, like I always think about Charlize Theron when she was just getting like a lot of like girlfriend roles and things, and then she's in Monster, and then that flips like what we think she's capable of, and now she's in a lot of great dramatic roles and trying. So I feel like, and that's been the case going back to the beginning of time. Bela Lugosi, right after Dracula, struggled to find other kind of work, and that's just something that it's tricky when you're really successful in a kind of role for someone to see you as something different. And I'm sure that was the case with Ron O'Neal after Superfly.
The society we live in, especially when if it's a Black character playing a drug dealer, I mean,
yeah, exactly.
It becomes even harder.
Yeah, exactly. But so I didn't recognize a whole lot of its credits after this movie. The ones were, as you mentioned, the Final Countdown, which was that a Scream Factory? I feel like I saw a Blu-ray review of that.
It had a 4K from what is it? It's like Synapse, or it's not Scream, but it's like
I remember reading a review about it and it looked interesting. Yeah,
it's one of those boutique the home media dealers. For sure.
He's in. I haven't seen this movie in a long time, but When a Stranger Calls from 1979, a famous late 70s horror film, he plays a lieutenant. So I don't know if he's in very much of the movie, but I'd have to watch it again. But I remember liking that movie when I was younger.
It's been a minute since I've seen it, so I can't say how involved he is in the film. But if he plays a lieutenant, it just sounds like the cop that comes in at the end or something like that.
Is he the guy who says the phone call's coming from inside the house?
That'd be a good role.
Yeah. He's in Red Dawn too from '84, which I haven't seen Red Dawn in a long time. I can't remember who he played in that. I just remember like the core cast of like Patrick Swayze and some of the younger actors in that movie.
I assume he's not playing one of the Russians, but
I don't think so.
I'm not a huge Red Dawn guy, and I don't have that movie committed to memory to really remember it too well. Blue Underground, by the way, is the company that released Final Countdown.
Okay, Blue Underground.
Yeah.
That's the one, especially after having you talk about. I know you said it's not a great movie, but it does, from its cast and its premise,
worth a watch. Like it's
worth
not
a watch.
Yeah, it's worth a watch for sure. Like it's too interesting to pass up. So.
He did a lot of TV. He did some episodes of Hill Street Blues and A Different World.
World was the most notable one because he was on the show for
he was on the show for a while. Good. Yeah. His last major film role was 1996's Original Gangstas.
Okay.
And then he had a couple credits after that. He passed away in 2004. So, I mean, would we say his stamp on the film world is Superfly? That's kind of the movie that will always be synonymous with him.
For sure. Yeah, no question. That's Ron O'Neal's thing. We didn't mention that. Did we mention Superfly TNT? He directed. He wrote and directed.
Oh, I did not know that. I just saw on his IMDb it said 73 acting. It said the sequel. He directed the sequel too.
He wrote and directed it. Yes.
Oh, cool. Did he direct anything else?
That's a good question. Yeah, something called Up Against the Wall from 1992.
Okay.
Yeah, so
that's it. I wonder what that conversation was like in 72, towards the end of 72. I wonder if it's one of those things where they could make the sequel such a low budget and the original did well enough that he probably asked himself, can I direct the second one? And they said, go for it.
That makes me more curious about what it's about, because if he has issues with the first movie, then it's like maybe he took the second one, it's like, I'm going to do it the way I would do it and maybe try to cast himself in a better light.
That's
going to bump it up. That's going to bump it up the queue now as far as how fast I get to Superfly TNT.
Yeah, Superfly TNT, and you can't deny that title. It's fantastic.
Oh yeah, yeah. If the English Patient TNT, like I'm seeing that right away. Like I want to.
I think every movie, drama, comedy, musical. There should be a sequel with TNT in the title.
Chicago TNT.
Chicago TNT. That's awesome, man. It has been such a blast to talk to you about this movie, Aaron. This has been such a good time.
Yeah, for sure.
Chatting about Superfly as we kind of wrap up here. I'd love for you to talk more about you said a little bit about the beginning. Anything else you'd like to promote, or where our listeners can find you online? Now would be the time.
Yeah, for sure. As I said, I have a podcast I do weekly with my friend Abe called Out Now with Aaron and Abe. That's available on iTunes and everywhere you can find podcasts. Okay. I have my personal blog. The code is Zeke.com. That's everything I do ends up on that site, whether it's my reviews on Weave Entertainment or Why So Blue or what have you. That's all there on the part of the podcast. All there goes to my blog. I'm also on Twitter at Aaron's PS4.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks for being here, Aaron. Thanks to all of you for listening. You can find us online at filmat50.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And check out my YouTube channel, Brian Rowe Video, for lots of videos about film and Oscar history. Until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.